Hey there, Guardian. Ever feel like you're navigating a whole new galaxy out there in the Space Force?
Well, today's deep dive is here to kind of ground you, so to speak.
We're strapping in for a crash course on Space Doctrine Publication 3.0.
SDP 3.0 for short.
Think of it as your roadmap to understanding the Space Force's unique role in the grand scheme of national defense.
That's right. It's about going beyond simply launching satellites.
We're talking about understanding the core principles of space power and how you as a Guardian contribute to the fight.
All right, so let's unpack this.
SDP 3.0 starts by defining space power.
What exactly does that mean beyond, really cool technology and spaceships?
Well, you're right, the technology is impressive.
But it's really about leveraging space to achieve national objectives.
SDP 3.0 emphasizes that space power isn't just the Space Force's responsibility, it's about how we integrate our unique capabilities with the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines.
And even civilian partners, allies, and commercial space companies.
It's a team effort.
Kind of like a pickup game of cosmic basketball.
But instead of shooting hoops, we're ensuring national security.
SDP 3.0 calls this unified action, right?
You got it.
Working together across all domains. Land, sea, air, cyberspace, and of course, space.
It recognizes that modern warfare is interconnected.
What happens in one domain impacts all the others.
So we have to operate as a cohesive unit.
And this is where the concept of space superiority comes in.
Okay, space superiority.
Now, we're not talking about planting a flag on the moon, right?
You're right.
No flags on the moon.
At least not yet.
It's really about ensuring the U.S. and its allies can freely utilize space for our national security while deterring adversaries from using space against us.
Ah, so it's less about dominating space and more about ensuring a stable and secure environment for everyone.
Exactly.
It's about establishing norms of behavior, preventing conflict, and, if necessary, being prepared to defend our interests.
And that's where those three pillars of space power you mentioned earlier come in. Shaping the operational environment, preventing conflict, and prevailing in conflict should deterrence fail.
A strategic trifecta.
Let's break those down.
First up, shaping the operational environment.
What does that even mean in the vastness of space?
Think of it as setting the stage for responsible space operations.
It's about working with our allies and partners.
Building relationships through information sharing, joint exercises.
Even things like developing common practices and norms for space activities.
So like setting traffic rules for space to prevent collisions.
Both literal and figurative.
Precisely.
And a big part of that is deterring adversaries.
This could involve developing counterspace capabilities.
Making it clear that any aggression in space will be met with a swift response.
Making sure everyone knows we mean business.
But hopefully never having to actually show them.
Exactly.
And that ties directly into the next pillar, preventing conflict. Preventing conflict.
Now that's where your role as a Guardian gets really interesting.
You're the eyes and ears in space.
Using advanced technology to detect potential threats before they escalate.
So like a cosmic neighborhood watch?
But instead of binoculars and walkie-talkies, we're talking satellites and cutting-edge sensors.
Exactly.
Early warning systems are a prime example,
These systems are constantly scanning for missile launches.
giving us crucial time to respond if needed.
And it's not just about watching for direct attacks, right?
It's also about understanding what other nations are doing in space.
Their capabilities, their intentions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Space situational awareness is key.
We need to know who's up there
What they're doing.
and whether their actions pose a potential threat.
This information helps us prevent misunderstandings and miscalculations that could lead to conflict.
It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
Anticipating problems before they arise.
This SDP 3.0 acknowledges that conflict, even in space, is sometimes unavoidable, right?
Sadly, that's true.
Deterrence is always the goal.
Mm.
But as we all know, it doesn't always work.
Which brings us to the third pillar, prevailing in conflict.
And remember, this isn't about the Space Force going it alone.
Yeah.
We're back to that unified action idea, that interconnected battle space across land, sea, air, cyberspace, and space.
What SDP 3.0 calls joint all-domain operations.
Exactly.
Think of it like this. You've got a squadron of fighter jets trying to take out an enemy target.
That their communications are being jammed from the ground.
Space-based systems can provide alternative communication channels.
Ensuring the mission succeeds.
So even though we're talking about different domains,
They're all working together.
relying on each other,
Space isn't just a separate battlefield.
it's an integral part of every battlefield.
You got it.
Or let's say there's an imminent threat to a critical satellite.
The Navy might be called upon to intercept a hostile vessel preparing to launch an anti-satellite missile.
The Navy, protecting space assets.
That really underscores how interconnected everything is.
And it's not just about responding to direct attacks.
Space-based intelligence can provide real-time targeting information to ground troops,
Giving them a critical advantage in a firefight.
so space is both a source of support and a potential target.
Making the Space Force's role in protecting those assets even more critical.
Exactly.
And SDP 3.0 recognizes that operating in this environment requires a nuanced understanding of the competition continuum.
Competition continues.
Okay, now you're just using big words to sound smart.
What's that all about?
Think of it as a spectrum.
Ranging from cooperation at one end to conflict at the other.
It recognizes that we're not always in a state of war or peace.
We're constantly interacting with other nations.
Sometimes cooperatively, sometimes competitively.
And unfortunately, sometimes with the potential for conflict.
So it's not a light switch.
It's a dimmer switch with a lot of shades in between.
You got it.
For example, the International Space Station.
That's a perfect example of international cooperation in space.
Astronauts and cosmonauts from different countries working together, conducting research.
Exactly.
Right? Sharing a space station.
Sharing knowledge.
Even sharing a laugh or two, hopefully.
A reminder that even in the vastness of space, we can find common ground. And even when there are political tensions on Earth, having those lines of communication open in space is crucial.
So cooperation is one end of the spectrum.
What about the other end, conflict?
Where does that fit into the competition continuum?
Well, thankfully, large-scale conflict in space is something we haven't experienced yet.
But SDP 3.0 acknowledges that it's a possibility.
And outlines how the Space Force would contribute to deterring and, if necessary, prevailing in such a conflict.
And this is where things get really complex, right?
Because actions in space can have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
That's why SDP 3.0 emphasizes the importance of operating responsibly, even in a competitive environment.
It's about taking calculated risks, understanding the potential for escalation, and always striving to de-escalate tensions whenever possible.
It sounds like walking a tightrope in zero gravity.
In a way, it is.
And that's why risk assessment is so central to everything the Space Force does.
So we've talked about this competition continuum.
From cooperation to conflict.
But no matter where we fall on that spectrum, there's always an element of risk involved in space operations.
SDP 3.0 really hammers home the importance of risk assessment, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
As a guardian, you're constantly weighing potential benefits against potential downsides.
SDP 3.0 breaks it down into three main categories. Risk to force, risk to mission, and risk of escalation.
Okay, let's tackle those one by one.
What does risk to force mean in a space context?
Are we talking about like space pirates boarding a satellite?
Well, hopefully we won't encounter any space pirates.
But in all seriousness, risk to force is about protecting our most valuable assets, our people and our equipment.
So minimizing casualties,
Preventing injuries.
safeguarding those billion-dollar satellites.
Exactly.
Think about the dangers involved. Space debris,
Potential for enemy attack.
even the inherent risks of launching something into space.
It's about minimizing those risks at every step, from launch pad to orbit and back again.
Right, because even though we think of the Space Force as operating in space,
There's a whole ground-based infrastructure that's vulnerable as well. Launch facilities, control centers, communication networks.
especially.
And those have to be protected just as vigorously as any space asset.
Now, risk to mission is a bit different.
It's about assessing the likelihood of success versus the consequences of failure.
So let's say you have a critical satellite that's malfunctioning.
The mission might be to try and repair it, but there's always a chance the repair could fail.
Or even make things worse.
Exactly.
And those consequences could be significant.
Loss of intelligence gathering capabilities.
Disrupted communication.
Even impacts to our navigation systems here on Earth.
Guardians have to weigh those risks very carefully before undertaking any mission.
It sounds like a constant balancing act.
Of weighing those what-ifs.
Okay, so we've covered risk to force, risk to mission. What about risk of escalation?
That sounds like it has the potential to get a little hairy.
It can.
This is where things get really geopolitical.
Risk of escalation is all about recognizing that even seemingly minor actions in space can have unintended consequences.
Because space isn't just an empty vacuum.
It's an arena where multiple nations, some friendly, some not so friendly, are all trying to achieve their objectives.
In that kind of environment, miscalculations or misunderstandings can happen.
Imagine a scenario where we're conducting a routine maneuver with one of our satellites.
And another nation misinterprets that maneuver as a hostile act.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly you've got a situation escalating out of control.
Exactly.
That's why clear communication, transparency about our activities in space and a deep understanding of other nations' perspectives are so critical to mitigating that risk of escalation.
So in a way, being a guardian is as much about diplomacy and strategic thinking as it is about technical expertise.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's about being a responsible actor in space even, or perhaps especially when things get tense.
This has been an incredible deep dive into SDP-3.
It's clear this document isn't just about military strategy. It's about navigating a complex and ever-changing domain.
And as a guardian, you're right at the forefront of that challenge.
Remember, space power isn't just about having the most advanced technology.
It's about using that technology wisely, ethically.
And in a way that safeguards our nation's interests while striving for a more stable and secure future for everyone.
Words to live by even if you're living and working thousands of miles above Earth.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, Guardian, stay frosty out there.